This week on our free segment here on YouTube, join us as we talk about America's favorite leading indicators for recession. Are they more busted than ever? Sit back, grab a cup of coffee, and join us as we take you through the numbers. Hi, Lauren.
Hi, Lyndsay.
How are you?
I'm feeling a little crazy today.
What?
Do you want to do something different?
Scared to answer that, but okay.
Okay.
Yep.
We're putting Lyndsay in the hot seat today and flipping the script. So,
boy.
Welcome to our Freaky Friday edition of By the Numbers. I am so excited to sit in the host seat for once. We have the same types of articles that we typically go through, but the goal today is not just to pick apart a headline, not just to say, where does an article get things right, get things wrong, where can we add more nuance? But I really want to showcase Lyndsay, our famous trusted advisor who, although she's incredibly humble, she comes in week after week and is really the voice for what we think you all at home are probably thinking and probably would ask if you could ask me a question. She's also an expert in her own right. So
I tried.
You have more experience than most people in this world dealing with a plethora of different businesses, of giving actionable advice, not just the economic backdrop. I bring the numbers, but you are just a pro at what to do with this information. So that's our goal today. Today is when the rubber meets the road and we say, what do we actually do with this information?
Yeah, I think that this is a really fun idea that you had, and I'm glad to be a part of it. A little bit nervous for what you're going to ask and to be on this side, but again, another humbling experience. So let's get at it.
Well, let's do it. Let's jump right into the articles.
All righty.
Our first article is titled, America's Recession Indicators Are More Busted Than Ever. So, Lyndsay, I have to admit, this is not just an article for me to excuse myself for when we get things wrong as economists, but it really made some good points to me about many, and as the article states, many of these recession indicators have been tripped, yet no big downturn has materialized.
Mm-hmm.
So we're talking about, as the article puts it, the quirks of the pandemic business cycle, driven by a rolling series of disruptions to supply and demand, really changed things up this time around.
Yeah.
Now, we've been talking a lot in the past about different metrics, different thresholds, different rules, but I want to ask you, from the man on the ground kind of perspective, is this what our clients are feeling?
You know, I think it really is, as all of my conversations go, really industry specific. And it depends on also, what leg of the supply chain the client that I'm talking to is in. But I think, the quirks of all of these indicators that we typically rely on to indicate a recession and whatnot, it's kind of the same with regards to who I'm talking to on a day-to-day basis, because everybody does feel things a little bit differently. And it's our goal at ITR and in our role as trusted advisors to help them navigate those unsteady waters. And, we've oftentimes will say we want to be that stake in the ground for you to plan for. But I guess the question that this article is really asking is, well, what happens when that stake in the ground that you've relied on is coming up wrong potentially,
Right.
Not in the sense of who you're working with, but the indicators are pointing towards different things than they have in the past.
Exactly. That was really something that struck me. And really, as this article talks about various thresholds that have been breached, but there wasn't a kind of general feeling of recession. And so I wanted to ask you, I know as I talk to clients on a day-to-day basis, it seems like we get waves of upgrades, then we get waves of downgrades. Either everyone seems to be outperforming this cycle, or everyone is feeling a little bit more pain than the early indicators had maybe suggested. Are you feeling one way or the other at this point in the cycle?
We're experiencing a lot of upward revisions in our forecast, which truly is one of our favorite things to do and to deliver here at ITR, because it means that somewhere along the lines, our clients have outperformed the forecast that we originally put into place for them, or at some point in time put into place for them. And it is our hope in our partnership with these clients that it was our management objectives and our consulting guidance that potentially helped them, outperform that forecast. And the conversations are also just so much more lighthearted when you're talking about an upward revision than
That's true.
the other side of the cycle when we're having to downgrade forecasts.
Actually, I would really echo that. It seems like a lot of the indicators are showing more resilience, at
Mhm.
least from my point of view. I'm, again, very quantitative, you're very qualitative. So this is why this is a good partnership, a good pairing.
Well, one of the things that I love is the back and forth conversation that happens between the folks on your team and myself and our clients. It's really a collaborative nature to these programs because we're never going to be upward revising or downward revising a forecast without having a conversation to understand the contributing factors to that. We've had clients before say, please don't upward revise our forecast.
Right.
This is an anomaly. We just took in a really big client. This is going to normalize over time. Or we just implemented this new initiative that's going to cause a temporary spike. It's
Mm,
not going to be, something that is so high performing for a long time, but rather helps us to maintain more sense of normalcy or whatever the conversation might be. It's
exactly.
back and forth and it's a two-way street is what I'm trying to say.
For sure. Are you seeing any themes at the moment that are really causing this change, or is it just widespread across clients, across industries?
A lot of lessons were learned over the last few years, especially
Yeah.
through the pandemic. And I am seeing a more intelligent business leadership coming about and the ways that people are thinking and the strategies that they're implementing and some of the strategic initiatives that they're sharing with us
Hmm.
are at just a higher level than I feel like they were pre-pandemic.
That's so fun. These, again, indicators that we've been watching, we've been talking about a lot that are just not showing the same behaviors as they had been.
Mhm.
A lot of these are centered around the labor market. And
Yeah.
this is something that you and I have been talking about week in, week out. I'm not sure we've taken a single week off of the labor
I
market.
know.
And actually, their first point in this article is something we discussed just last episode about temporary employment.
Mhm.
They say in the past, trends in temporary employment were a big tell. Whatever happened in this sector soon happened in the broader job market. Um, in this current cycle, temp employment peaked in March 2022, and it has shed 515,000 jobs since then, a 16% drop. But total payroll employment has kept rising anyway.
Mhm.
This is something I know you've had conversations just for years now with clients about how hard it is to hire. Is that changing, or is this maybe a decline in temp employment, but overall increase in total employment? Is that just a catch up?
Yeah, I would say it's a little bit of everything in my opinion, and that when when we're looking at these employment indicators, unemployment rate, or we're talking about this temporary, I'll kind of quote you as my research, I'll cite you as my research here, and saying that yeah, that temporary indicator is kind of the temporary employment indicator is kind of looked at, but it
Mm,
really doesn't provide that much of a forward look.
right.
And so therefore it's not overly reliable in determining if the labor market is softening. But I would
Hmm.
say that based on my conversations I'm having with clients, the labor market is becoming easier to manage.
Oh, good.
It is no longer this hot button topic in all of our conversations. Whereas before, I mean, in my entire tenure here at ITR, we have been talking about ways to recruit, ways to retain, really creative initiatives. And perhaps the most scary part for business leaders is the expense involved with
Yes.
retaining employees and recruiting new talent
Yeah.
just to keep up. And I'm not hearing about that as much anymore. Again, this is another one of those lessons learned thing. Every time we're
Mhm.
talking about labor and, labor constraints or anything like that with our clients, it's no longer about the tightness of the constraint, but rather these lessons that they learned and the creativity in their internships or in their onboarding or their incentives.
Interesting.
It's no longer this big heavy weight. The other great part about a softening labor market is when we were desperate for employees, there were a lot of mistakes being made because really folks were hiring a willing and able body that they could get into that position
Yes.
and train them. And that would result in mistakes, and perhaps really costly mistakes that resulted in repetitive work needed to be happened and bottlenecks in their manufacturing lines or whatever it may be. It was costing them money, and these mistakes were making it so that in a period of growth, our clients were in some scenarios not able to produce at the level at which our forecasts and the markets were saying that they should be able to, because they didn't have either the capacity by way of the number of people, or the people that were in those jobs were not the right fit.
That's so dangerous for a company.
Right. And I'm not
Absolutely.
hearing that as much anymore.
Well,
So
that's
that's
good
a
news.
positive.
Okay, I'll
Yeah.
take that as a win.
Yeah.
And this actually feeds into another threshold that the article pointed out, one of these other recession indicators. And it's, again, another one we've picked on in the past. This was a month or so ago, called the SOM rule.
Oh, yeah.
This says the economy is likely in a recession when there is a 0.5 percentage point increase in the 3-month average unemployment rate over the prior 12 months. So in June, it says that difference stood at 0.43%. So we're, again, very close to triggering this SOM rule, and by certain other months may have triggered it already. And it says there are 2 reasons why the unemployment rate can move higher, either an increase in joblessness, so job losses, or more workers entering the labor force, as has been the case in recent months, without immediately finding a job. So does this go back to a question that you asked me last week? You said clients are saying, hey, where are all
Right.
these workers?
Right. And I think that goes back to your answer from last week, which was there's a little bit of reskilling happening here.
Yes.
So those folks that perhaps were in job A, B, and C before the pandemic have reskilled and are perhaps working in industry X, Y, and Z at this point. So it's a trade-off, but I think it's also important to note that that rule doesn't really, or isn't able to distinguish between those 2 major factors.
Exactly.
Is it major layoffs, or is it more workers entering the workforce? And when we talk about the employment rate, how many workers are employed and are working, it's more than ever. So I think the risk here is that what once was a rule of thumb for is a recession coming may not be as accurate as it once was.
That's very true. And even if we just look at the major rule of thumb for a recession, the kind of be all end all rule of thumb, 2 consecutive quarters of contracting GDP equals a recession.
Right.
We've had a lot of conversation about this. US economic growth on a GDP basis was negative in the first and second quarters of 2022. But the broader economy, as this article quotes, as measured by indicators like employment, personal income, and consumption expenditures, never cracked. So will every business feel that 2 consecutive quarters of GDP decline as a recession?
Well, I want to stop and take over because I'm in this seat and I feel like I've gained some power from sitting here. So today, because you're asking a question about GDP and it is so timely, we just got the second quarter release of GDP. So
Ooh,
today I
do
get
tell.
to share it.
Excellent.
So the second quarter of GDP beat consensus expectations, coming in 2.8% on an annual pace. Now, hold on, because I know your economist mouth is wanting
You
to
know I'm
correct me because I
chomping
said
at the bit.
annual pace.
Go for it.
As you know, we do not use annualized data in this scenario. We are talking about a look at a 312 or a quarterly rate of change. And from our perspective, the 312 or quarterly rate of change for the second quarter came in at 3.1%.
Okay.
So beating expectations, yes. But to answer your question, will all industries, will all of our clients be feeling a recession or be feeling, whatever GDP is spelling out, basically?
Right.
And this is where when I talk with clients, I really want to urge folks to know your indicators, to know what is pushing and pulling your business. And if we're looking towards recession indicators like GDP, it's really important to know kind of where your business lies within that. So, and I think the other thing is GDP is so large and it's made up of so many different components. This is one of those reasons why we always say to our clients, don't fall victim to a false signal. You can't hang your hat on one singular indicator. You need to be looking at a roster of leading indicators and working with that against your company's data, not even just your industry's data, but your company's data, to truly identify how that's going to impact you. GDP, like I said, large number, it's made up of many different factors, but the rise in GDP is heavily weighted towards consumer spending. But what if I'm a B2B business?
Exactly.
And I'm more heavily tied towards business investment side of GDP. And this is, again, with the expectation that you're really knowing your indicators, or working with a company like ITR to help you really know your indicators.
Fair enough.
We would be able to say to a client that in a B2B world, in business investment, portion of GDP may be softening. It may be what's pulling the GDP figures in one direction or the other. That's why it's important to know your indicators and plan accordingly. Knowing what portion of the indicator or which portion of the economy you play in is really important to avoid big mistakes.
Absolutely.
Right.
So you're saying someone who's sitting at home today reading that headline and saying, wow, GDP outperformed expectations. It is ticking up. It is just going gangbusters.
Right.
And here I am not holding it. Right. Feeling soft, not feeling that win.
Right. So what's the mistake that could be made there from a business leader? Oh my gosh, GDP just beat expectations. Ramp up inventory, everybody. Pump it out. Let's go. Well, if you're in B2B and business investment is that portion of GDP that you need to be looking at, and you're not looking at it separately from that, well, you might make the mistake of ramping up that inventory when otherwise your consultants might be telling you, press pause, watch your inventory levels closely. Yes, but press pause for right now. And we'll help you figure out by leaning on your other leading indicators within your roster that we're suggesting that you look at to help you better plan when to ramp up that inventory for that growth period that we've been talking about for 2025.
Absolutely. And I think that's a great point that we do expect at ITR, a little pullback this year, not a severe one, but a little bit of a pullback in CapEx spending. So
that right there is a great example of knowing the different factors that go into your business decision making.
So are there other indicators you would be following from a broad level, if not GDP?
So specifically, when we're looking for these major macro leading indicators that are going to be calling for a recession or any major change in the economy, knowing where you align is important. So if it's consumer spending, if it's B2B, GDP might be your number. But if you're more industrial or manufacturing based, this is where we're going to be encouraging clients to be tracking more in line with industrial production index. We want to be looking at the industrial production index. GDP is 2/3 consumer spending. And I think the industrial production index, hold on, I have it, is 75% manufacturing.
All right. So if you're a manufacturer, that might be where you should focus.
Right. If you're looking at the GDP figures and planning your business according to that, then you risk making some critical mistakes. When I was reading this article, one of my biggest takeaways as a prior ITR fan before I was even an employee is that when you have all of these indicators that seem to be going haywire and people are kind of wondering, well, what can we rely on to tell us if a recession's coming or not? It's really important to have those partners in play like us at ITR. And not only that, but I want to take a moment to just kind of focus on our methodology for a quick second.
Okay.
And when there are different variables happening that otherwise are outside of the norm. The methodology that we use here at ITR has a much more qualitative component to it than perhaps regression modeling, or is, from my understanding, how other economists can potentially be looking at data
history. That is more typical, yes.
That is more typical. So from my experience here at ITR, the ability for you and your team to have these conversations with our clients, really understand the boots on the ground, and then be able to have this human approach, get into these forecasts and kind of massage them based on these other factors that are happening that aren't typical. That is what lends itself to us remaining accurate in times of turmoil and unrest.
It's great to hear that because it is tough in our jobs sometimes. We need to see the forest through the trees. And we have in the past had favorite indicators. And I
Mhm.
know I certainly have some of my clients that say, hey, what is X indicator doing? Because we always track
Yeah.
that. And then when you don't, it can be jarring to say, why are we diverging?
Right.
There are usually good reasons, but we do need to understand those reasons. And more importantly, we need, as you called it, a slate of other indicators to still give us that forward looking guidance.
Right, absolutely. So, all that to say, we're on it. The more conversation back and forth we have with our clients, the stronger the analysis is, and the stronger our
Exactly.
understanding is so that we can be that much more accurate.
That's all the time we have for today's free episode on YouTube. Thanks for sticking with us as we flipped the script and put Lyndsay in the hot seat. Please be sure to like and subscribe. And if you want to view full episodes where Lyndsay gives some great business advice on everything from AI and running a business in a rising interest rate environment and a persistently higher interest rate environment, please be sure to click the link below to get full details. But until next time, bye, Lyndsay.
Bye, Lauren.